Jacob was a young man who loved adventure and wanted to find meaning in his life. On the night of April 5th, 2017, he packed his red Specialized hard rock bike, which had Milwaukee Tools written on it, and his dad Randy had won at a work contest with camping gear and rode straight into one of the most dangerous wild areas in the Pacific Northwest, Olympic National Park. Then, by himself on a lonely trail deep in Olympic National Park, there was no blood, no footprints, no signs of a struggle, just total silence. Park workers searched everywhere. Helicopters flew above looking for him, but they found nothing. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, until more than a year later, something came out of the wilderness. What they found will change everything you thought about going into the wild by yourself. The first person to see Jacob while he was still alive was a local man near Indian Valley on April 5th. Later, a woman saw someone pulling a red trailer up Fairome Hill at 1 in the morning, but it was the third meeting that would upset investigators for years. A woman driving on Soul Duck Hot Springs Road saw Jacob struggling uphill, fighting against his heavy gear just 2 miles from Highway 101. Several hours later, when she drove back down the mountain, she saw something that made her curious enough to stop and take a picture. There, 6.3 miles up the river road, Jacob's bike and trailer were completely left behind. The spot didn't make sense. It wasn't good for camping or even for hiding a bike. His stuff sat out in the open, only 10 yards from the road and 20 feet from the rushing Soul Duck River. A plastic sheet was spread on the ground, surrounded by camping equipment, like someone had been going through their things. But here's the detail that still gives people chills. 4 arrows were stuck in the ground in a perfect east-west line near the sheet. Why would Jacob put arrows in the ground? Was it some kind of message, a sign for someone who might come looking, or something much more frightening? Park workers found the scene the next morning, April 6th. The bike was working fine with full tires and no signs of any accident. Most of Jacob's things were left alone. It looked like he had just walked away from everything he owned and disappeared into the forest. Ranger John Bowie asked for more help. Maybe the bike rider had walked to the river to get water and accidentally fell in. The Soul Duck runs cold and fast, filled with melting snow from the Olympic Mountains. In water under 40 degrees, a person would live for minutes, not hours. But as rangers looked at the riverbank, a scary realization began to grow. Jacob Gray wasn't just missing. He had completely vanished without leaving any clue, leaving behind only mysteries, and those 4 puzzling arrows pointing toward an answer no one could understand. A person isn't officially called missing until someone files a missing person report. In Jacob's case, nobody did for 3 days. His bike stayed by the river while rangers thought he was on a short hiking trip. It wasn't until April 7th that Ranger Brian Ray found a list of phone numbers in Jacob's belongings and called his sister Mallory. The news hit the Gray family like lightning. Jacob's father Randy grabbed his wetsuit, threw it in his truck, and drove all night from Santa Cruz to Washington. He was pulled over by police for going 100 miles per hour in Oregon. When he explained what was happening, the officer let him go with a warning: just drive safely. But when Randy and Mallory got to Olympic National Park, they made a shocking discovery. No official search had been started. The park was understaffed because of budget cuts, with 2/3 of their security staff moved to other places. They were dealing with a plane crash and another missing person case. Jacob's situation was being treated as low priority. The family was amazed. Time matters in search and rescue work, and 5 important days had already been wasted. Randy put on his gear and jumped into the Soul Duck River himself, looking behind waterfalls and under fallen trees where a body might get stuck. The water was so cold it made him gasp for air, but he kept diving, kept searching, kept hoping. What frustrated the family most was the bureaucracy. Olympic National Park works like its own country. Outside search teams couldn't help without official permission. The Coast Guard, just minutes away by helicopter, was told they couldn't help. Volunteer dog teams were turned away for park-approved teams that never came. Jacob's Aunt Elise finally confronted Ranger Ray directly. "We, as Jacob Gray's family, demand a serious search," she said firmly. The ranger just replied, "Okay." But nothing changed. Randy searched wearing cotton clothes under a plastic raincoat, getting painful foot problems from constantly wet socks. He pushed through Devil's Club plants that tore through his gloves, cutting his hands, but he never complained. Every day he didn't find Jacob's body meant another day his son might still be alive. The longer the search continued, the more questions came up. Why would Jacob plan a trip going east to Vermont, then go west without telling anyone? Why leave his bike unlocked and visible with equipment spread around? And what did those 4 arrows mean? From where Jacob's bike was found, the Solduck River flows 78 miles to the Pacific Ocean. If he had fallen in, experts in fast water rescue said he couldn't have gone very far, maybe a mile at most. The river was extremely dangerous in April, full of snowmelt and rushing fast through a series of dangerous log blockages. Olympic mountain rescue volunteers finally arrived nearly a week after the bike was found. They found evidence that someone had changed from hiking boots to running shoes near the water's edge. There were scratches on a moss-covered rock, suggesting someone had slipped and fallen into the water. 30 yards downstream, they found signs that someone might have climbed back out, but tracking isn't an exact science. The conclusions were nothing more than educated guesses. The evidence could have been left by anyone, or by no one at all. 2 search dogs smelled something at a log jam downstream, their handlers getting excited about the possible discovery. But when divers searched the jam many times, they found nothing. The scent could have come from many sources, carried downstream by the water flow. Randy personally dove into every promising spot, not trusting anyone else to be careful enough. He tied himself to ropes and lowered himself into pools behind waterfalls. He literally used his body as a raft down the North Fork of the Solduck, stopping to check caves and deep pools where a body might be trapped. The search was hurting him physically. His body was covered with bruises from hitting rocks. He wasn't eating right, drinking only river water, pushing himself until he was exhausted. But he couldn't stop. Every pool might hold his son. A pair of Burnside brand shorts in Jacob's size was found a couple of miles downstream and sent to the crime lab in Seattle for DNA testing. The results came back negative, another false hope in a case full of dead ends. By this time, the park had changed Jacob's case to a passive search, meaning no more resources would be used unless new evidence showed up. For Randy, this was completely unacceptable. If the park wouldn't search for his son, he would do it himself. Randy Gray made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He closed down a successful construction business in Santa Cruz and devoted himself completely to finding Jacob. He sold the family house, bought a diesel pickup truck and slide-in camper, and basically moved to the Olympic Peninsula. The search expanded beyond the river. Jacob's sister Mallory had given him throwing knives for Christmas, and they weren't found with his abandoned equipment. Neither were his crampons for mountain climbing, a warm jacket, a water filter, or his camelback backpack. Maybe Jacob hadn't fallen into the river at all. Maybe he had left his bike on purpose. Randy began thinking about possibilities that scared him: human trafficking, cult recruitment. Jacob was a good-looking young man who had done some modeling in Santa Cruz. What if someone had targeted him, convinced him to leave his bike with a story about needing help? At 2 a.m, Randy walked the streets of Port Angeles, talking to drug users and homeless people, anyone who might have seen his son. There were reported sightings, but none led anywhere. Jacob seemed to have simply disappeared. Mallory shared her theory with her father. Jacob was truly lost, she explained. He didn't know what he wanted to do with his life, where he wanted to go, what he wanted to become. The state of the world had made him sad. Maybe he chose to disappear into the wilderness on purpose. The family had been worried about Jacob's mental state. The divorce had hurt him deeply, losing the beloved family home where he had grown up. His mother, Laura, said he was struggling with adulting. A cross-country bike journey was supposed to help him find himself, give him direction and meaning. But there were troubling signs. The Bible found with Jacob's equipment had Isaiah 34:14 circled in dark ink. And the desert creature shall meet with the wolves, the hairy goat also shall cry to its kind. Yes, the night monster shall settle there. What message had Jacob been looking for in those dark end times verses? Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. Randy kept looking, kept believing. He got a small bike that folds up and rode ferries to nearby islands, checking organic farms where Jacob might be working with a fake name. He went back over and over to the Solduck River, looking through the same 12-mile stretch more carefully than any mountain river had ever been looked through before. By August 2017, Randy had been living on the road for months, moving around without planning, sleeping in his camper wherever his search took him. What should have been any rich man's dream total freedom to go anywhere had turned into his worst fear. He had lost his son, and nothing else mattered. The August full moon looked red, seen through huge wildfire smoke drifting down from Canada. Randy was staying at a place called The Barn, owned by people who study Bigfoot, and had opened their land to help search for Jacob. The building was full of gun cases, charging flashlights, and plaster copies of huge footprints. Derek Randalls and his Olympic Mountain Response Team had walked 730 miles looking for Jacob, crossing land that wasn't even on their maps. These were Bigfoot researchers, the kind of people Randy never thought he'd work with, but desperate times make unlikely partners. Nobody knew the mountains above the Solduck River better. They knew that finding one person in that huge wilderness was nearly impossible, but they didn't give up. Randy had been doing 12 to 14-hour search days for 4 months straight. His body was breaking down, but his drive never got weaker. "I didn't plan any of this," Randy said. "Jacob's my buddy. Do you think I want to be out here looking for my son?" He liked to keep moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking took him to dark places. Randy talked about Jacob as if he was still alive, while Jacob's mother, Laura, had started talking about him as if he was gone. The difference was heartbreaking and telling. "I'm going to give Jacob this camper when I find him," Randy told me. "He'll love it. We can put the surfboards on top and just live at the beach." The search had taken over Randy's whole life, but he couldn't imagine stopping. Somewhere out there, his son needed him. Dead or alive, Jacob deserved to be found. But time was running out, and the wilderness was winning. On Friday, August 10th, a team of scientists studying small mountain animals in the high country found something that would finally give some answers, while raising many more questions. Near the top of a ridge above Hull Lake, 300 feet above sea level, and at least 15 miles from where Jacob had left his bike, they found human remains. The place was stunning in how alone it was. Jacob's body wasn't near any trail. In April 2017, the area would have been covered with snow and dangerous from avalanches. How had he traveled so far from his abandoned bike? Why had he climbed up instead of following the river down to safety? Ranger Ray told Randy not to climb the mountain, to let the professionals do their job. But Randy ignored the warning. "What would you do?" he asked. "When does a father stop being a father?" Running up the mountain by himself, Randy missed the rangers who were carrying Jacob's remains down. While coming down above Deer Lake, he found other rangers doing CPR on a 29-year-old woman from Iowa who had heart failure. Randy stayed to help, taking turns with chest pushes. One of the rangers had just been part of the team that brought Jacob down from the mountain. Despite their efforts, the woman died. The official reason for Jacob's death was listed as unclear. The county medical examiner identified him through dental records. He had been carrying a cigarette lighter, warm clothes, plenty of food, and another Bible his grandfather's. Jacob had everything he needed to survive, yet somehow he didn't. Most troubling of all, his boots were found wrapped in garbage bags, a detail that haunted his brother Micah, who wondered if it might be a sign of suicide. "People do strange things before they kill themselves," Micah said quietly. Freezing to death was the likely cause of death. But that explained how he died, not why. What had caused this strong, capable young man to die alone on an empty ridge miles from where anyone was looking for him? The questions that had puzzled the search now became urgent. Why had Jacob planned a trip going east, then traveled west without telling anyone? Why park his bike unlocked and visible with gear spread out? Why were 4 arrows stuck in the ground? Had he been trying to leave a message about where he was really going? Most importantly, Jacob's remains were found on an open ridge that might have been seen from aircraft if helicopters had been sent right after finding his abandoned bike. Could he have been found alive? The truth about Jacob Gray may be simpler and more meaningful than anyone thought. Dr. Robert Coaster, author of the Search and Rescue Manual, Lost Person Behavior, offered insight that finally made sense of the mystery. "Children will often go up," Coaster explained. "So will people on a spiritual quest, depending on what message they get from God. I have seen people climb mountains." Jacob had been looking for answers in his Bible, marking passages about desert creatures and night monsters. His family worried about his mental health after his parents' divorce and losing his childhood home. He was struggling with becoming an adult, looking for direction and purpose. What if Jacob's bike ride wasn't meant to be a cross-country trip? What if it was the start of a spiritual journey into the wilderness? A quest for meaning that led him higher into the mountains, instead of down to safety? The 4 arrows stuck in the ground may not have been a message for rescuers. They might have been Jacob's own compass, pointing toward his chosen path into the high country where he believed he would find the answers he desperately needed. Randy Gray was right from the beginning. Jacob would go up, he said. Most lost adults head downhill toward people, but Jacob climbed toward something else entirely. In the end, Jacob Gray found what he was looking for on that remote ridge above Hull Lake. Whether it was peace, understanding, or simply an end to his struggles, we'll never know. But his story reminds us that sometimes the biggest mysteries aren't about what happened to someone, they're about what was happening inside them all along. The wilderness called Jacob Gray home, and in its own way, it gave him exactly what he was searching for. The tragedy is that it came at a price his family will spend the rest of their lives paying. Jacob's story isn't just about a missing person case. It's about a young man's search for meaning in a world that had left him feeling lost and alone. In the end, he found his answer not in the pages of a Bible, but in the silence of the mountains, where the only voice that mattered was his own. Did you like this story? If you found yourself in Jacob's situation, isolated in nature and seeking meaning, how would you have approached it? Share your thoughts in the comments section. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. We all lose our way from time to time. The key is to keep moving forward. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in our next episode. Hope you have a wonderful day.